Welcome to the Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Baker. Again, this is your podcast where we discuss everything travel and living related to this part of the world in Central America. Please don't forget to get your questions into me, and perhaps one of your topics will be on a future episode. Today, my guest is Ulrik Oldenburg. Ulrik is a travel consultant with Costa Rican Vacations and has an incredible story. He was born in what is now known as Zimbabwe before spending many years in his youth in Denmark, where his dad was from. The family then moved in 1980 to Florida, and in 1981, the whole family moved to Costa Rica. Ulrik spent much of his youth and upbringing and education here in Costa Rica, began working in tourism, and even spent 10 years working in Nicaragua, where he met his now wife. They've had 3 kids and have since moved back to Costa Rica in 2018 and live very close by here in San Jose. I have an excellent conversation with Ulrik about his travels, about the cultural differences between Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and what it's like raising a family here. And we also touch on the topic of sport fishing, something Ulrik is very passionate about, and we cover some of the biggest 3 questions. What species can you catch here? When should you look to do sport fishing here in Costa Rica? And where are the hottest places to do so? Guys, as ever, if you're enjoying this series, please don't forget to give us a like or a thumbs up to never miss, and well, of course, subscribe to never miss an episode wherever you get your podcasts. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Ulrik. Ulrik, good day, sir. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for coming on the Costa Rica Travel and Podcast. I'm excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here so much. I've watched a couple of them already, and they're exciting.
You and me were just chatting before we went live here. I'm pretty excited for this conversation, just to understand a little bit about what brought you to Costa Rica. It sounds like there's a lot to unpack. We're going to chat a little bit about what got you over here, culture, your experiences, raising kids, and then also focus a little bit on fishing, which is exciting for those fishermen or fisherwomen. How do you generalize? Does that cover men and women fishermen?
I found it easier just to say anglers.
Anglers. So any anglers wanting to come down, there's obviously some key questions regarding the excellent sport fishing here in Costa Rica. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But as ever, Ulrik, with all the podcasts here, please let me and all the viewers know, how did your Costa Rica journey begin? So summarize it. Let's get into it.
Oh, wow. It's a great story to tell, and hopefully this podcast can go on for 5 hours. My dad came to Costa Rica in 1980 and fell in love with the country. And in 1981, I said, Dad, I want to come live with you in Costa Rica. I was living up in the States in Florida. So he said, fine. So I came down in 1981 and started my high schooling years here in Costa Rica.
That's 1981. Wow. So we're over 40 years now.
Yeah.
since you first came over here. Before I ask you about the differences then and now, for those who can't quite place maybe your name or your accent, where were you born and where do your roots lie?
Oh, that's a tough one. In Costa Rica, we would say I'm a Sawate, which means, a mixed breed. My dad is Danish and my mom is British, but born in South Africa. And I was born in Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe. And we left before Rhodesia had its internal collapse. And so we moved to Denmark and got our nationality there. We were there for about 4 years. And then we didn't really like the winters in Europe. And so my family said, let's find someplace nice and warmer. Mom and Dad went to Florida. But my dad did not like the U.S. He was there for 1 year, and in 80 he came. So 79 he moved from Florida to Costa Rica and fell in love with the country immediately.
How old were you when your dad moved and took you guys? Well, I guess he moved then onwards from Florida to Costa Rica. How old were you at that point?
At that point, I was 10, but I moved to Costa Rica when I was 11 for sixth grade.
So those first 10 years, obviously you're quite young, right? Growing up in, like you mentioned, Rhodesia, 4 years in Denmark, probably not enough time to really understand the culture as a young kid, right? Only a year in Florida. So a lot of your schooling happened here in Costa Rica.
That is correct. Most of my junior years in high school and all my high school years were here in Costa Rica.
Wow, fantastic. That's excellent. So since you came over in 81, you mentioned San Jose in 1981, and you've been back and forth and all over. I would like to ask you, what was San Jose like in 1981? I mean, I feel like I'm approaching nearly 20 years now, 2006 when I came. I can't imagine 40 years. Like, how do you conceptualize that?
It exploded an unbelievable pace that I've never seen before. When I first came to Costa Rica in 81, I think there was something like a total of 40,000 vehicles in the country. Today we have over 1 million.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable. I remember when I would take the public bus to school from San Pedro Escalante to Cagliari. It was 2 buses, and it would take me a total of like 35 minutes.
Wow. Nowadays, for anybody who don't know, that's like one side of the city crossing all the way over, the headache of the traffic.
And it was so easy because everything was public transportation back then. It was buses and the red taxis. It was so easy to get around, and it still is that way. Just not the ease, but it's easy to get around. It's just not, time wise, it's a nightmare.
Yeah,
in the city.
Yeah. Wow. And so how long were you growing up in San Jose for, from 81?
So I finished up my high school year. I graduated here, high school, in 88. And then I went to live with my mom, who now moved from Florida to Texas. So I went to university in Texas for my 4 years. And I decided to work in the hospitality industry. I worked for the Westin Hotel Group for 2 years up there. And I just, after being in the race, the U.S. race and everything, doing 2 years in corporate hotel management, a big hotel there at the airport in Dallas, I just said, you know what, I miss that. There was something about Costa Rica, and I called my dad, and he told me he had a small hotel in Guanacaste that was, not doing very well. And I just said, I need to get out of the States. I'll take whatever job you have. And so he hired me as bar and restaurant manager in the Flamingo Marina Resort.
Nice.
And I came back, and I missed the pura vida feeling. And it's something you can't describe, right? If you had to put a dictionary text, you can't.
Yeah. As another podcast, one of our colleagues, Richard Bexon, who has a real estate podcast, he always asks at the end, no, it's actually Casey, the CEO of Costa Rica Vacations, on his Let's Talk Tourism podcast. He always asks, what is pura vida at the end of the podcast? It's a great question, right? It's really hard. Do you have a definition?
Well, I've found a more of appreciation for the definition when I have my friends that come over from other countries and ask me to describe it. And it's like, I always say it's a way of living. And, because they tell me how wonderful Costa Rican people are. And especially when I do my callbacks to them, I welcome my clients back home, especially in the US. I'm like, how was your Costa Rica holiday? And they're like, oh, now I know why you say pura vida on your signature. And it's like, yeah, it's a way of living. It's a way of saying, everything's just going great.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I've been here for quite a long time. You can't quite express it. Certainly is a way of feeling. And I think everyone else shares that feeling who lives here. So it's one of that kind of the mutual feeling. I wanted to ask you an interesting question that a lot of my friends and colleagues, and I imagine it's the same with you and yourself, when you raise kids here, a lot of these kids, if they have the option to study abroad, they tend to do so if you've traveled outside of Costa Rica. So you mentioned there that you went to study in the States and then did a couple of years work experience before coming back. What was the reason? Why did you want to move to the States and not necessarily study here in Costa Rica?
Well, actually, education here for university level is very good. My graduating class, there was 20 of us, and half stayed here in Costa Rica. The other half went and studied abroad. I just wanted to get out of Costa Rica because at the time I felt like it was a small country, and I wanted to be a part of the big world. And I wanted to go and see not just the U.S., also wanted to go to Europe, and I spent time in Europe as well. And it was amazing because when I came back, the friends that did the university education here were still here. So it was great. I was able to reconnect with them. And the ones that went abroad kind of never really returned. And although they do return for like reunions, they always tell me how much they miss Costa Rica. So I kind of sit there and go, yeah, I got the taste of the best of both worlds.
It's funny, I can really relate to that. I grew up in a really small town in the southwest of England, and I couldn't wait to get in the train station as soon as I was 18, go towards London, fly somewhere else and be outside. I obviously came to Costa Rica shortly after university and found it as, a lovely place to live and decided to stay. But I always have that appreciation for the smaller place when I go home, like the Shires, the rolling hills, the country living. There's a certain vibe that I think sometimes as you get a bit older, you can learn to appreciate. It's kind of like coming back to Costa Rica, but as a way of living as well. Like you say, you're trying to get out from the 9 to 5 or the stress and the endless competitiveness, right, in the States. So you come back here. I don't know if that's, sometimes I think it takes people decades to get there. Some people it's quicker. But I feel like you get ahead of it if you realize that quicker. And obviously you ended up, you got that job back in Flamingo. I wanted to ask you about the difference. So for those watching, Flamingo is a lovely kind of a port town, very popular tourism in Guanacaste on the North Pacific coast. How did that compare? So you got a job, you said you wanted to come back, anything that was available. You're working in tourism. How does living in Flamingo, which is probably, I'm sure when you came back, still a really small town, even, it's not particularly big today, really popular. How does that compare to the central hustle and bustle of the Central Valley?
Well, interesting. I did get to go back about a year ago, and when I was there in Flamingo, it had completely changed. They had my father was one of the developers that put one of the first hotels in Flamingo. There was only 2 hotels back then. And so when the clients arrived, just getting clients to Flamingo before the Liberia airport opened up was a 6-hour drive from San Jose. And so we would have to have them stay a night in San Jose, pick them up in the morning, shuttle them in a van, and then over to Flamingo. So those were big challenges. When the Liberia airport opened up, I remember the first charters that came in from Canada, we had to practically wait outside the airport for the charter plane to arrive. And those were going to be the guests that filled your hotel for the week. So it was very, very different in terms of when I first started as a manager there. There was only 3 restaurants there. So you had to either eat in our hotel or eat in the Margaritaville hotel down below, or eat at Marie's restaurant, which is, fortunately, it's still there. So it's kind of a nostalgia. Now, I went back there recently, and there's a brand new marina that's probably a $50 to $60 million invested in there. And so it's a bustling big town for me compared to when I was there.
Yeah.
Our hotel was only 34 rooms, and we only had 1 van that could do all the transfers. And so it was very complicated. We didn't work with fax. Reservations were done by fax with no email. So it was really remote. I think there was only a total of 7 phone lines in Flamingo, and we only had 1 of them at the hotel. So it was interesting.
What would you say is the primary reason for visiting Flamingo? If someone's going, oh, well, what's Flamingo about? Why would I go there?
Well, Flamingo, in terms of beaches, it is the most, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, I say it's the number 2 beach in all of Costa Rica. Uh-huh. And the only reason why I put that one other beach in front of it, that's because of the crushed shells, and that's the famous Conchal, which is only 15 minutes away from Flamingo. So you can stay in Flamingo and go visit Conchal without having to go and stay in Conchal. So Flamingo has a much more white sand beach and bigger waves than Conchal. Conchal is much calmer. Plus, Flamingo has one of the only marinas in the country in the North Pacific.
Right. And incredible sunsets. I find that it's one of the only places where the sun actually goes down right in the middle of the horizon, just about anywhere on that Flamingo beach.
And that's very different from other beaches where you try to see the sunset and it's on the back of the mountain.
Yeah, you're looking around the corner, trying to get around the, yeah. And I agree. For me, it's right up there. Conchal is lovely. And if you like snorkeling, diving, swimming, the beaches are a little bit larger in Flamingo, but it also feels like a place that isn't actually as developed as much. You've got a few villas that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years along the coast. The town itself, like you mentioned, there isn't really anywhere else to grow. There's a couple of condos upwards, and then they overlook the marina. But it's nice that it still seems to retain this seclusion on the edge without space for expansion. Right.
And so that's where Flamingo probably wins it for me in terms of the other developing areas where you just see development. We had a manager meeting this morning, and we were talking about Haco and all the high-rise condos that are going in there. And it's like their projected condo growth is 200% in the next 24 months.
Wow. 24 months as well.
Whereas in Flamingo, I think something new is one house and maybe, a townhouse.
Yeah. How long were you working then in Flamingo when you came back to Costa Rica?
So I did 7 years in Flamingo before we opened a sister project up in Nicaragua. And then that was my jump to Nicaragua.
So I'd love to at some point explore on this podcast more of our destinations that we sell at Namu Travel and Costa Rican Vacations around Central America. What made it, just to touch on Nicaragua, what made that connection? And then how do you find those two cultures? Obviously, it's very close, the Nicaraguan border, borders Costa Rica to the north. So it's not that far a drive, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours up to the border from Flamingo, Guanacaste. What connected that for you, and how did that differentiate the next little period of time there?
Well, actually, what happened was a former realtor in Flamingo had moved to Nicaragua, and he came back and contacted my dad, my brother, and I. The three of us were running the hotel, my dad, my brother, and I. And he said, I found some extraordinary beaches up in Nicaragua, and it's about a quarter of the price in Costa Rica. This was in 1999. So we went up there to see Nicaragua, and we saw beaches just like Flamingo, like Playa Grande, absolutely white sand, and all the infrastructure for roads and everything, but no development. So,
right.
It was, 25 cents to the dollar on buying property there at the time. So my father said to my brother and I, which one of you two wants to go up to Nicaragua, and the other one will stay behind and run Flamingo. And me at the time was, single. So I said, yeah, I'll go up to Nicaragua. So I went up to Nicaragua, and my brother stayed behind and ran the Flamingo project. And so we started a sister project in Nicaragua called Iguana. And it's a very famous place there. Now it's got, a couple hundred condos, a golf course, and 5 or 6 restaurants and what have you.
Beautiful. And what year was this when you headed up there?
He went up first to do the securing the property and the legal paperwork. So I really didn't go up there up until 2003, because it took 4 years to get this project going.
Okay.
And once we started building the golf course, we hired all the guys that used to work at Conchal Golf Course, at the Pinilla Golf Course.
Yeah.
And we brought them up there to Nicaragua to build the first golf course on the Pacific coast of Nicaragua. So it was real easy to bring this team that was successful in Costa Rica to Nicaragua, where they had no golf courses. And so it was a real easy project in terms of finding the strategic people that you needed. And we got it done.
Was that a gamble at the time? What was the tourism industry looking like in Nicaragua?
Oh, yeah. And when my father first told my brother and I the first weekend in Flamingo, he's like, hey, guys, I'm thinking about investing in Nicaragua. We both looked at each other, and we had that look like, didn't they know that there was just recently a civil war back there?
Right.
And he's like, I want one of you guys to go up there and run the project. We both kind of like, okay, flip a coin, right? Nobody really wanted to go. But a year after securing the project, he's like, okay, now it's time for you guys to go up and inspect the property. I fell in love with it immediately once I saw the beach and I saw the colonial city of Granada. I'm like, oh, this is going to be like Costa Rica, but
with Nicaraguan vibes. It's a slightly different feeling. I'm a big fan as well. The location of that, you mentioned Granada, that must be close. Is it just north of Rivas? Well, no, Rivas.
Yes.
San Juan del Sur on the Pacific coast.
There's a coastal highway going in right now. I haven't seen it, but my friends all tell me that it's going right on the back door of the project of Rancho Santana, which Namu Travel does represent. Yeah. We also have Morgan's Rock. We also have San Juan del Sur. So it's just north of that, just north of Macul, where the airstrip was put in by the Pelas group and the government. So it is a nice project. It's fully developed. We don't have any land there anymore. We sold it all out, and there's 400 properties in this little project with a beautiful white sand beach. Yeah, no, beautiful.
I've been many of those places you visited. We've shot the videos at those hotels over the years. Macul is lovely. That golf course is really, really nice. No, that's super exciting. And how long did you find yourself in Nicaragua for?
Well, that was about a 10-year stint, and
that's a long time.
Yeah, and that's where I met my wife, and we had our children. One was born there, 2 were born here in Costa Rica, because we were back and forth between Flamingo and Nicaragua. But it wasn't until the crisis of 2018 when we decided, hey, it's time we pick up our stuff in Nicaragua, because I saw the same thing going on in Nicaragua as I did in Zimbabwe. My family, it was like history repeating itself. Yeah. The government becoming an autocrat and that kind of stuff. So I didn't want my kids to go into a school where they were afraid to say something or think of something.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. You get out before that happens. Before I asked you about coming back to Costa Rica and raising your family here, what do you say to your friends when they ask you, Ulrik, what's the difference between the culture in Nicaragua and Costa Rica? How do the peoples change? What are the two biggest differences that you remember or you feel?
Well, I would say that the cultural system is very different there. There is unfortunately, I don't like to say this, but there is classism. I felt it a lot more classism. There were the haves and then the have-nots. When we were developing, I remember seeing one of my friends who was a surfer. He used to come to Iguana all the time because surfing is really good. 2 great surf breaks, and he would be like, "I remember the first time I came and visited you here, Ulrik." He said, the maids were walking from the local village. And then the second time I came, they were riding bicycles. And then the next time I came, they were riding motorcycles, and they had their homes and they had their kids going to a public school, which we built. We built a public school there. And so he's like, I can see what the development has done. So there was a building of a middle class, which I was very, very pleased to see until this crisis hit again and kind of gave Nicaragua a black eye again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It's funny. I remember some real visual stories. When I first came over here, I was obviously leaving the country from Costa Rica every 3 months for my tourist visa. I started crossing the borders, Riva, San Juan del Sur, explored Managua, Granada, the local towns that were easily accessible via, ground transportation when I was still a student at the time. And I remember feeling the difference between the size of the middle class in Costa Rica to the absolute poverty that is clearly visible when you get into Nicaragua, especially the larger cities. And I remember being in a gas station, just getting some snacks, and the difference between going in from 35, 40 degrees centigrade weather into really cold AC, and those buying hot dogs over the counter and those begging for money outside the door. And that for me was, something that always stuck with me. And then get back to Costa Rica and you don't see that as much. Of course, you have the poverty line and whatnot, but it's the middle class, like you say, much, much bigger. And that wealth is distributed here in Costa Rica.
And I think that made a difference for what put Costa Rica as probably the top tourist destination for Central America.
100%.
With a stronger middle class, it was easier for hotels, for tour operators to get personnel to be on the service standards what the Americans and Europeans are used to.
Yeah.
Whereas in Nicaragua, and even some extent when I was in Panama, I felt the same thing. It was like the service level took a while to get there because you don't have a middle class to be able to do in this tourism industry specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think it's apparent as well in different areas around Central America, but yeah, very much so here in Costa Rica. So when you came back, avoiding what was then approaching in Nicaragua, why did you choose to come back to the Central Valley with your family and your kids, as opposed to staying in Guanacaste?
Well, I've always, after living in Guanacaste and Flamingo, I loved it for the beach and everything, but it was the education for my kids. That was the number one. My wife said, we're going to get to a good school, be close to good hospitals. Now, there are in Guanacaste, but when we relocated, it was just being built in Guanacaste. So we chose San Jose because of the school. My kids go to the American International School here in San Jose. And we could find a property close by the school within walking distance from the school, so you don't have to ride in a bus. And so education was number one. Number two was healthcare. And number three, my father being retired, living here close by this school, we could kind of take care of him. So, because now he's retired.
Yeah. So maybe it was a natural progression. And I think obviously when you have your family to consider, right, you do think about these things, obviously education, medical welfare. What drew you to the American International School specifically, other than just the proximity?
Well, that was a school where I had graduated from in 1988. It's a 50-year-old. It just celebrated its 50th anniversary 2 years ago. And what I love about this school, there are other good American schools here in San Jose, or international schools, I should say. British American School. British School is another good one. They have the Pan American School. But American International School, what I like about it is the classroom sizes are 8 to 12 students per classroom. So it's really student focused.
Yeah.
One-to-one teaching.
Yeah, you can really, that way, the kids will get a far more better connection with the kids. They won't be overwhelmed, even in the UK public school system. So obviously a lot of classes, I remember classes of at least 25 to 30 students going around different subjects. Yeah, excellent.
My nephew just graduated there. My brother's youngest boy now, he just graduated there. And he's now got a scholarship to a university up in Canada for computer engineering. And so I'm very proud of him, and I'm taking him up there next week. So he got a partial scholarship from here, from this school. And that made a big difference too. So now he can go to get a computer engineering degree up in Canada. I told him to be prepared. It's going to be just like the Danish winters. They're going to be miserable.
Even colder, perhaps, in Canada. It rains along Scandinavia and Britain, that's for sure.
Yeah.
When your kids were getting a bit older and they're obviously graduating and they're thinking about their studies, did they take an interest in their history? Did they want to travel? Or how many of your kids decided to stay? Or how many wanted to explore?
So I have a large group over the spectrum. My oldest one has graduated in Costa Rica. She has 2 degrees in Costa Rica, but she is into the music and arts and dance. And so she's very integrated here culturally. I wanted her to go abroad, but she didn't. She's now thinking about doing that for like probably a master's either in Mexico. They have good masters. The nephew I mentioned, his older sister also graduated Costa Rica with 2 degrees, and she's thinking about a master's program up in Mexico. The nephew is going to Canada. My 3 youngest ones are still at American International School, but my daughter, the one that's in 8th grade, she's like, no, I'm going to the States. I'm going to do what you did, Dad. That sounds like a lot of fun. I think she thinks I'm really strict, right?
Yeah. I can't wait for that. As I say, my daughter's very young. I got another few years yet, but I know it's around the corner. So I find it fascinating asking the question. As I mentioned, a lot of friends and family, when you grow up in Costa Rica, you want to kind of see a bit more of the world. You get that influence, right, from the media, series, Hollywood, wherever, about whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, or even further east. Just traveling in general, right? Fantastic. When you travel abroad, or you have friends come down and they ask you, what are the pros and cons of living in Costa Rica? Should I do it? How do you answer that question?
Well, pros and cons. Okay. It used to be one of the cons. I used to tell people that Costa Rica was a little bit behind on the curve of internet and the iPhones. When I was in Nicaragua, I remember I had the company, the project, they got me one of the first BlackBerry phones, and then they got me one of the first iPhones. And when I come back to Costa Rica, my friends were here in Costa Rica, like, you got a BlackBerry in Nicaragua? How's that possible? We don't have that technology here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about 20 years ago. So I could see Costa Rica was a little bit behind the curve in the technological side, but that has completely changed now. It's completely changed. You get high-speed internet, you can get phone lines in a day. Whereas in the old days in Costa Rica, to get on a phone line, you remember you had to wait on a waiting list for 6 months, and you had to be a friend of someone at the ICE to even get in the queue.
Yeah.
So I feel like Costa Rica has really caught up on the technological side. But at the same time, that is the problem is that we're seeing all these cars in the Central Valley. We've seen more cars coming in. The number one production in Costa Rica is medical devices now. So we're seeing all the free trade zones, which is it's congesting the city, but at the same time, it's bringing in development that will bring technological advances for us. So I kind of see that as a good with the bad, right?
Yeah.
In terms of cost, I think people always say, "Oh, Costa Rica is expensive," but I just was up in the States 6 months ago, and even the towns that I considered to be better to buy things, like Dallas compared to Miami, or Dallas compared to California, even Dallas was more expensive than Costa Rica now.
Ah.
So I found that, because I like to gauge myself on a couple of things, like what does a typical breakfast cost you?
Yeah.
What does a bottle of water cost you? What does a gallon of gas? Now, I always tell my clients, look, Costa Rica gas is more expensive, but that's because we don't have refinery. We buy refined fuel.
Yeah.
So that's number one. But overall, I think Costa Rica is actually, in terms of, yes, if you go to the touristy place, you might pay a little bit more. But I still feel like Costa Rica's got an up advantage over the U.S. because of the what we saw with the inflation. It doesn't mean that Nicaragua is not cheaper or Panama is not cheaper, but it's still not as bad as what I was surprised to see.
I think it's a really good point. I think people over the last maybe 5 to 10 years can easily jump on the idea that Costa Rica is expensive based on certain, whether it's groceries, whether it's bills, monthly fees, internet, gas prices, buying a car, impuestos, taxes, or like you say, a block of cheese that cost you $8. Yeah, maybe that cheese is coming from a certain place, but milk is actually quite reasonable. And if you buy the local stuff, it's going to be even more reasonable. But again, the cost of, rent, perhaps if you're renting, can obviously, depending where you are, perhaps be cheaper than somewhere like the States or Europe.
Oh, absolutely. I think even in San Jose, when I told one of my nephews, I'm like, yeah, we have an apartment down the street here that's going out for rent. And it's a 2-story, 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo, very luxurious, $850. He's like, what? In Karigari? I'm like, yeah. That's very reasonable rents. San Jose. Now you go to the beach locations. That might be different because people ask for more money because the rent and the property values at the beach are much, much higher than here in San Jose. That was one of the other things I like about San Jose. Property values are much more affordable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big fan as well, just because of the location and obviously amenities depending on what you're looking for in your lifestyle. But yeah, and not only the beach, the demand, right? There's only so much land. There's only so much real estate that's actually available with the space and the properties that are there. For individual, whether you're looking to rent, whether you're a tourist, it's really, really interesting perspective because I think a lot of people, I have a question sometimes that I ask about debunking myths of Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. Actually, when you get into the cost of living, you see, I've like 20 years of, marketing online. Oh yeah, you can live $2,000 a month, $2,500 a month if you're retiring here. It is probably quite reasonable. It depends on your own lifestyle choices, right? And where you want to be in the country. Yeah, I totally agree. Hey, before I ask you, sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a nephew that works here and he works with a call center and he makes about $1,100 a month and he survives quite well. I mean, he has a little flat. He has a used car and he's quite happy and he's paying for his education through university. It's one of my other nephews. He's going to Costa Rica University and he's a 2-year projected to graduate. And so for $1,100 a month living on a Costa Rican, going to the Pali as opposed to the Automercado and not driving everywhere, taking a bus or an Uber instead of using his car, he survives and he's paying for his university that way. So
wonderful.
It works.
And that's commonplace for a lot of people, especially at that age group, right? I totally agree. And why it's so popular as a nation for other Central American nation when you see people wanting to come and work in Costa Rica because they do pay well and you do have, a solid system. I was going to say, before I ask you a couple of key fishing questions that I know a lot of fishermen are probably listening to, anglers are interested in. Are you set in Costa Rica? Obviously, you've got connections, all over the place. Are you feel happy here for the next few years? You don't have any plans to move somewhere else?
No, I don't have any plans to move anywhere else. We're talking about maybe going to Europe to visit my father's side of the family next year for the summer holidays. But realistically, I want my kids the 3 youngest ones to finish their high school here and then move on for their university. We have some property, my wife and I, that the other day I mentioned to her, let's put that one on the market. She's like, that's our retirement home. Are you kidding me? I'm like, okay.
So, don't be very careful.
So my wife, and she's Nicaraguan, so she's not planning on going anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now, I was interested because a lot of these the top happiness index charts, as well as Costa Rica being on the happiness index over the years, Scandinavia, and I include Denmark in there with Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Always incredible social security systems, happy people, very progressive, very good education. That's why it's interesting to have someone from that side of the world to compare another considered very successful a very successful nation. Both my half sisters are half Danish. So, they've been there a lot and it's somewhere I'd like to travel to. And I always see them doing, very well on these indexes as well. So if that's obviously the downside is the weather, right? But I don't know if there's anything else that would encourage you to, explore your dad's heritage a little bit more.
It's Denmark's wonderful. I love the food. I love the culture. I love the people. I talked to, my wife and I told her, I'm like, I'm in t-shirts, shorts and flip-flops at work today. You can never do that in Denmark except for the summer,
Yeah, I appreciate it. As I've told many people on this podcast, I am in a minority. I love the cold, miserable weather. Give me snow, maybe not rain all the time from the UK, but there's something about it. I like controlling it. But hey, San Jose is, really pleasant and temperate most of the year round.
It's the best weather, in my opinion, year round.
Fantastic. Hey, so we got a couple of big questions here. Three big questions that I want to jump into before we wrap up, because I know we could go on. It's been great chatting to you. In terms of sport fishing, so before I ask you the 3 questions, where's best to fish, what kind of species, and when to fish, what got you into sport fishing here?
So the hotel that we started in Flamingo was on the side of the marina. It was called the Flamingo Marina Hotel. And so, the first clients that came were the fishermen. We had a small dock. It wasn't really a marina. They called it a marina, but it was one slip and maybe 8 boats. And it was like the first fishing tournament held out of Costa Rica was held out of Flamingo. And so most of our clients were fishermen. So you kind of had to learn the jargon, the talk, and a couple of times got invited to go out on the boats. And I thought that was the neatest thing since sliced bread. When you're catching this fish and it's adrenaline and people are yelling and screaming at you because it's a big bill fish, a sailfish or a marlin jumping out of the water. It was a rush. And I loved that. And it became a thing. And my brother and I, before the hotel was built, when we would go to Flamingo, before the hotel was built, before any of that, we would stay in the little Potrero Hotel, which is now called Bahia del Sol. We would bring our little fishing rod and we would go down to the rivers there and we'd catch snook and Pacific barracuda. And we'd bring it back to the hotel and Maggie and Paul in the hotel would clean it up and cook it up for us. And we thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So it was always in us, my brother and I. But when the big fishermen came, the real serious pros, that was out of my league. But those were my guests. So I had to know, what they were looking for.
For sure. No, I mean, it's a really great destination. We're both friends with Justin DeBoom, who managed our fishing division for a long time. We spoke to him on this podcast about living and everything in Jacó, which is a big destination for sport fishing, just over an hour on the Central Pacific coast. But where would you say is best to fish here in Costa Rica? There's obviously different regions for different species, but break it down for me.
Well, this is where Justin and I would argue, and I tell this to some clients, like he's the Los Sueños guy.
Yes.
It is probably the best marine in the country, no doubt about it. But I'm the guy who likes to argue with Justin and say Quepos is better. So I argue Quepos and he argues Los Sueños. He had to show me a roosterfish that he caught the other day that was over 45 pounds, and it was an enormous beast. And he's like, "Oh, got this out of Los Sueños, didn't get it out of Quepos." So fishermen, we always like to brag. I'm just more in Manuel Antonio just because of the nature and the surrounding, and to leave the wife and kids at the hotel and they can see the monkeys from the pool while I'm out catching fish and not worry about it. But fishing is pretty much the same grounds for both of those areas, Quepos and Los Sueños. When you're going offshore, the drop-off is really close. Flamingo was always great. The issue was many, many, many years ago in the 90s was it got a bad rap from the fishing commercial longliners, the Chinese, the tuna boats, and when they came in and just destroyed it. But thank God they managed to completely restore fishing even in that area. The only disadvantage was Flamingo and Tamarindo was that we get the trade winds in the Papagayo famous trade winds in the dry season, which is when the family season. So fishing is better there in the off months. So we're looking at from March till November for the Flamingo, Tamarindo, Guanacaste area. Yeah. Whereas I would say Los Sueños and Quepos, you can pretty much do fishing almost year round.
That was the second or third question. When is best to fish? How do you differentiate? I guess if you're fishing in Jacó, Quepos area, still expect potential rains in the afternoons in the off season, late August through to November. But yeah. And what about on the Caribbean side? Like if you're looking,
the Caribbean side's a different species altogether because you're fishing out of Tortuguero, and it's really some of the best tarpon fishing in the world. I've done tarpon fishing in Florida when I was living in Florida. My older brother would take me tarpon fishing to the Keys. And those tarpon are not near compared to the size of the tarpon we catch here because these are ones that are coming out of the river, the Rio San Juan, which is on the border of Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And these are monsters. We're talking about 80 to 180 pounds. And it's to me, it's my second favorite fish to catch in Costa Rica is the tarpon fishing. You're going out with a guide on a panga, a center console boat. And it's just, you're casting, you're jigging, and it's just so exciting, when you see these tarpon hit. And it's like the sailfish, but in a freshwater, brackish kind of environment.
How long does it take to reel a big ass 100-pound tarpon in compared to like a marlin or a sailfish?
Well, if you ask Justin, how long did it take Ulrik, he'll tell you it took me an hour. he could do it in about 30 minutes. He's been doing it all his life, right? But that one took me about an hour when I was with Justin.
It's like fighting a big tuna.
It is. It is. And the thing is, it's on a casting reel, so it's much smaller. It's a lighter pound test. You give them a lot more drag, And so there's a lot more fight in it. And of course, the rod has a lot more flex than the sailfish and the marlin, which they're sturdy rods versus a casting rod.
And when is best in Tortuguero to come tarpon fishing?
Well, my favorite guide up there, Primo, he tells me, it's been kind of a year where it's been one good month, one bad month, one good month. But typically, I like the tarpon fishing from May until August. But you can get some good months in January and February. It's just not, because remember, the climate in Costa Rica flip-flops between the Caribbean and the Pacific. So you don't want it too much rain, but it's good to have a little bit of rain in the river mouth for the tarpon to be feeding.
And then generally, again, marlin, sailfish are kind of the tournament time of year. So late January all the way through April, Mayish, high season weather, really popular, coming down, Triple Crown events in Jaco.
And then for the tarpon, if you come in the Costa Rican rainy season, it's really not so much on the Atlantic side. And then it's good weather. Plus you get to do the turtle watching at nighttime, which is kind of an added treat.
Yeah, mix it up. I've been encouraging Justin to start a fishing podcast because I know there are many more questions about how, when, and where to fish in Costa Rica. It's just a question of finding the time, and I'm sure he will get you on it because there's a lot to cover. I find it a fascinating subject. We've filmed a few bits and bobs over the years. And yeah, I mean, it's a whole industry in itself, right?
As long as you don't put me on the spot with him about which is better, Capos or Jaco, because then we'll have an argument there.
If you go far and out offshore, eventually you'll meet each other in a triangle.
That's exactly my argument. It's the same point.
It's the same point. You're just leaving in different areas, and perhaps for the family, more things to do at the Manuel Antonio National Park. Ulrik, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I could definitely go on. So I appreciate that, but hey, perhaps we can get you on in the not too distant future.
Absolutely,
to discuss San Jose in the next few years. I think there's a whole topic.
This is a growing city. I chose to live on the side of the airport because I'm only 10 minutes away. I have a friend that lives in Cartago, and I told him, unless there's an airport in Cartago, I'm never going to move to Cartago.
That's a long way, especially with the traffic, as you mentioned now. Yeah, a lot fresher though.
Oh, yeah.
No, Ulrik, thank you very much. Hey, I'm going to put your contact information in the description for those watching on YouTube. And obviously in the title, if you're listening to this podcast on any of our other SoundCloud or iTunes and so on. So thank you very much. And hopefully, as I say, we'll get you on very soon. Thank you for your time.
Been an absolute pleasure, Adam. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Cheers.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I could listen to Ulrik for a very long time. Absolutely fascinating story about growing up here, education, living in the difference between Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and obviously raising your family as well. If you want to reach out to Ulrik, you can find his information and contact info in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube, and I'll try and put that information in as well in the description of the episodes if you're listening on other platforms. Please don't forget to give us a like and thumbs up if you enjoyed this conversation, and of course don't forget to hit that subscribe button to never miss out on a future episode. Speaking of future episodes, for the next couple of weeks, one of my good friends and colleagues, Jess Lickey, who's been on this podcast a number of times, is going to guest present and talk to some very interesting characters in the same way here over the next couple of weeks. So please take a moment, listen to those podcasts, and get your questions into Jess for the next few episodes if you have any. I'm sure we would love to hear from you, and perhaps you have a topic for one of our future podcasts that we haven't discussed yet. Let us know, and we'll get straight back to you. So for the time being, for myself, Adam Baker, hasta la próxima.